Recording. Great. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. Well, afternoon for me, maybe morning for you. We are recording the session, just so you know, and we'll make this recording and slides available to all after the event on the APA SCD website, which is conveniently apascd.com. If you're attending today live, you'll be able to receive 1.5 AICPCM for this webinar. We will also share a version on YouTube on our website that can be viewed later for credit. So you'll want to look for the live version if you're watching this live, and the other if you're not. So my name is Jenny Koch, and I'm a principal planner with Roadside and Harwell, or RHI, in Alexandria, Virginia, just outside of DC. I've got with me today my colleague from the APA Sustainable Communities Division, Gabriella Baldessari, who you'll be hearing from in just a second. We've got several great speakers who we'll talk more about in just a bit. But as you can see, as you hopefully know, today's webinar theme, we're celebrating some of the award winners from last year from our Awards for Excellence in Sustainability. And we're also talking a bit about this year's webinar program, this year's awards program, which is set to kick off by hopefully the end of this week. And we've got some updates about that. Before I get into more details, I want to acknowledge our group of sponsors that we're so grateful to. Thank you to all these organizations who help us put on events such as this webinar. Includes a long list, but I want to acknowledge them by reading them out loud. Includes UrbanWorks 25, UrbanWorks, Smith Group, Boston University, Evan Bach Consulting, Viscering Consulting Group, the University of Florida Department of Urban and Regional Planning, Devon's Enterprise Commission, 5 Engineering, Tesca, Environmental Partners, Jacobs, HAF, Carbon Solutions LLC, Greenwoods Associates, the Great Plains Institute, Clarion, Planning Communities, Burton Planning Services, VHB. So thank you again to all of you for supporting the division's work. If you want to know more about the division, you can visit our website, which you can see here. It's apascd.com. To find out more about the awards, you go to /awards. We also have a LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, I believe, and you can always reach out via email as well. So again, today, for today's theme, we're talking about the awards for excellence in sustainability. In a few minutes, we'll hear from some of last year's award winners. But before that, I want to give a quick overview of this year's award program. If you're not familiar, the awards program honors projects, plans, policies, individuals, and organizations whose work is dedicated to supporting and growing sustainable communities. This is our 11th annual awards program, which is exciting. Celebrated the big 10-year anniversary last year, this year technically. I've got on here a tentative deadline for January 8th, 2024. If there's any delays in getting things out this week, we'll adjust that a bit, but we're hoping to post the packet soon. And as I noted, we do have some updates to that process in general. But before that, I just wanted to note we're keeping the same categories from last year. So if you've been involved in the webinar program, the awards program last year, these will all look familiar to you. What might not look familiar is the platform we're using. So this year, instead of submitting the awards via SurveyMonkey form, we are using a new platform, all new to us, called Judgify. It does require those submitting an award to set up an account, but the beauty of that is that you'll be able to save it and come back to it. You can adjust your nomination form as you go, rather than needing to submit it all at once. So we thought that would be a good advancement. Is the screenshot here of what you'll see when you go to the awards website. We've also removed or adjusted some of the requirements this year. One of them I want to point out today was that we have removed the requirement for the plan or project to have been completed within 3 years. of submission. And the reason for that is we wanted to give you all a chance to demonstrate some outcomes from your plans and projects. And we know that that's not always easy to say right after they've been completed. So we certainly welcome newer plans and projects, but also those that have been around a while and might be able to demonstrate some of those outcomes. A couple other updates, but they are more minor, so I won't go through them today. But we will try to point them out when we release the packet so that you're aware of any changes. As I noted, we're hoping to get this out this week. It'll be on the website, which is once again posted here. If you're interested in submitting a nomination, I definitely encourage you to do that. Or if you know of anyone else who might be interested, please pass it along. Or if you're listening and you're interested in being a part of the awards jury, I'd encourage you to reach out to me or Gabby as well, and we'd be happy to have you involved. And that gets us to today's webinar. So today we will have 3 presenters. You'll hear more about them as we go. We will have a Q&A at the end of the webinar. So you might notice the chat function is turned off, but you can submit questions at any time via the Q&A function on Teams. And we won't answer them in real time, but we will share them when we get to the end. So if your question's for a particular person or on a particular topic, you might want to make sure to include a note in your question itself. That being said, I believe one of our presenters may be on his way in yet. So Gabby, is that correct?
Yes, so I will go ahead and kick it off with our first presenter today, Chris Reed. So first, my name is Gabby Baldessari. I'm coming to you live from Woodridge, Illinois, and I will go ahead and introduce Chris. Chris Reed is the Sustainability Manager at the City of San Luis Obispo and is committed to collaboratively creating carbon neutral, equitable, accessible, and prosperous communities. Mr. Reed has worked with local governments for over a decade and is deeply driven to address the causes and impacts of climate change. And with that, I will turn it over to Chris.
Great, thanks so much. And let me get my screen share up. Can you just confirm that you can see the presentation view?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, great. My name is Chris Reed. I'm the Sustainability Manager at the City of San Luis Obispo. For those of you that don't know us, we're about a 50,000 person population community on the central coast of California, about midway between Los Angeles and San Francisco. We're an economic hub of our county and region. We're the government center, both county and city. Obviously, our daytime population doubles, or in some cases triples. We also are home to a major university. I'm really excited today to talk and share with you all about our climate action plan, which we adopted in 2020, and the update we just adopted in 2022, and to share some of our innovations and some of our lessons learned. I think today was a consultant for a long time and have done a ton of climate action plans and have presented a lot around the sort of like the heart of what it is to do a climate action plan. Given that we're focused on innovation and lessons, my presentation today is really going to focus sort of narrowly on the things that we did that were, I think, new to us, and some of the lessons we've learned now that we're really almost 4 years into implementation. All right, so our session organizers asked us some questions at the beginning, ahead of this presentation, and I think I'm just going to answer them head on as a way of setting sort of context or overview for the rest of the presentation. We adopted our climate action plan in 2020 and readopted an update in 2022, really at the direction of council and community priority. In 2018, we had a council come into office that were all 5 of them had climate as one of their major concerns or considerations. We also had a mayor that referred to herself as the climate mayor. So we had broad support, and that really continues through the day. As we go through the slides and I share some of the things that we include in our plan, I think you'll see this, and our key innovations really are grappling with what it means to not just have a plan that deals with incremental change, but directly addresses transformational change. Another innovation is around storytelling and leading with community benefit. And then finally, taking that transformational change really seriously and integrating the plan into existing city and community processes. And what I hope you'll take away from this is our sort of key lessons is that one, sustainability work is inherently relational, and that the planning process is the perfect sort of safe space for relationship building. That if we're going to be successful in achieving our climate and sustainability goals, that has to be integrated into existing or emerging processes in the agency and community. And perhaps this isn't touched on directly in my presentation, but as a result of climate change, the next several years and decades are going to be pretty wild, right? And we're already starting to see that the impacts from climate change are disrupting our ability to implement our plans. So creating a flexible planning structure is going to be really critical to be successful in the future that we're all moving into. Okay, get into the project. The transition is really slow for some reason. One sec. All right, so in 2018, our council sort of came into, as it's currently constituted, sort of with their alignment towards climate, started their terms, and they directed staff to create a plan to achieve carbon neutrality by 2035, which is obviously, for all of you who are practitioners, know that's wildly ambitious. So we spent 6 months to a year really digging deep into the literature, talking to other practitioners, talking to other cities to understand how this could even be possible, and came up with some guiding principles. Those are that's the systems that we occupy, the economic, the utility, the social systems are really responsible for the climate crisis and are also, by influencing systems, our opportunity for responding adequately to the climate crisis. That climate crisis and social equity and racial justice and environmental justice are closely linked and must be addressed together. That when we're thinking about transformational change, some organizations are uniquely capable of some things, like a city's really great at land use authority and large scale transportation infrastructure. And other organizations, like community-based organizations and nonprofits, are really great at other things, like relational work at the community level. We know that cities had to lead. This is particularly true in 2018, but it continues to be true today. And that coming out of COVID, and this was a sort of historical moment for all of us, right? That there was actually a path forward, taking the energy and resources for climate action to invest in sustainable economic recovery. So we had those principles in place, and then we had to go develop the plan, right? And like all of you, we're all good community outreach stewards. We all are highly effective practitioners, right? In this space, we understand how important community is. We had a goal of speaking with 1,000 community members, which for a city our size is kind of a lot. And we were really excited to say that we did that. We did that in all the standard forums that you all, sure you do outreach in. One of the things that we really were excited to innovate around, though, is this concept of storytelling. And so we held a number of storytelling workshops. We had storytelling spaces online. We showed up in random pop-up spaces to have people tell stories. And the idea here was, tell us a story of what our community is like in 2035. And not just in the abstract, but we actually had this sort of long storytelling workshop process where we asked people to sit in silence for 5 minutes and imagine their bodies are 10 years older and they're in a community that's 10 years older, and what does it look like outside your window? And then we asked them, what's the best version of that future? We were able to take that best version and combine it into a story about what it means to be a low carbon, resilient economy. Again, not in the abstract, but really in a way that resonated with people. We're then able to organize our plans, actions, and goals around those feelings and visions. And so we came up with our plan, and we put the plan together in 2 volumes. The first is our storybook, and these are stories from the future that illustrate exactly what it means to be a low carbon community. And then the other is something you'd all be much more familiar with is our technical foundation, where we have our GHG inventory and our actions and quantification and all that good stuff. Start with the stories. So this is what our storybook looks like. You'll see we have 5 stories in there, and once we're focused on economic development, these are actual young entrepreneurs in our community that are capitalizing on the green transition. You'll see that we have our story on the left, and then on the right, we have our actions of what are the actions that we need to take to make that story true. On the right, you see this is fun fact, actually, my mom plugging her plug into her electric vehicle at one of our chargers downtown. Stories about how she's out and about shopping downtown, supporting our local economy. And on the right are the actions that we took to make that future a reality. And then, of course, we have our technical document, our volume 2, which is our real planning framework. Included this slide for future reference if people want to take a look at it. I'm not going to spend time getting into all of our goals and sub goals here and the specifics behind it necessarily. I think that might be a better for another space. But just to say that, like all climate planning frameworks, we have sort of a robust analysis underpinning the work we're doing to achieve our transformational change. And I will talk a bit about some of those actions later in the presentation. Importantly, our strategy for success with our climate plan is that we integrate the climate work into every single thing that we do to the maximum extent feasible. So on land review, we have local thresholds of significance that we essentially regulate or have CEQA evaluate projects that need to be consistent with our CAP. We've incorporated a budgeting policy around sustainability and climate into our financial planning process. Our annual work programs across every department has climate action implementation in them. And then we have our own municipal operations carbon neutrality goal that we're rapidly implementing that we call Lead by Example, so that we can show exactly the work that we're doing to our community and learn lessons along the way. So we adopted that in 2020, and the idea is this is big, bold, and transformational. Let's go ahead and come back just 2 years later with an update. And I know that's a really tight turnaround, but we were really intentional about giving ourselves 18 months to learn on implementation and then sort of course correct where things were going great, continue them, expand them, accelerate them. Where our initial assumptions were wrong, let's course correct and do something else that's also transformational. So it was really great to have an immediate near-term opportunity to learn and adapt. You see, if we had volume 1 and 2, which we showed previously, our third volume is then our next set of tasks, the 2023 to 2027 work program. Some examples of how we were able to learn, we had our technical work foundation and work program. I call it your climate plans. Transportation is a big one. So you're able to adopt an active transportation plan in the interim, do some really meaningful projects, understand how the infrastructure that came out of those projects were influencing behavior, and then amend our work program moving forward. So across all of our sections and all of the different topical areas that we do our work in, we have these nice tight feedback loops that allow us to understand as we update our climate plan if we need to sort of ratchet up or ratchet down some of those actions. In our update, we had a chance to improve on our community outreach. I said earlier, we were really proud to reach over 1,000 community members in our initial climate plan process. We also looked at the demographic information and saw that 1,000 people were highly unrepresentative of our larger community. So we decided to convene, I think it was probably 15 stakeholder roundtable meetings as part of our update that specifically brought in folks that don't typically participate in government processes, that are underrepresented, but are representative of our larger community demographic. So we went sort of instead of a mile wide and inch deep, really went deep dive with our community in updating these. We also did some fun community events like our climate party and other larger opportunities to have the broader community give us feedback on where we should be headed. Of course, we're all faced with this incredible funding opportunity through Inflation Reduction Act, Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and California, there's also a tremendous amount of resources for climate funding. So we wanted to make sure our update reflected this new funding environment. There's a number of slides here that sort of go into how we evaluated our recent accomplishments and what notable future tasks we're pursuing. I'm not going to touch on those just given time constraints, but wanted to leave those in the deck for folks' reference in case they were interested. The thing I did want to close on, though, is that in addition to the technical tasks that we have, and again, I think because those are so standard, I'm not going to spend time on them. There are things like decarbonize our electricity system, plug as many fossil fuel appliances into the electricity system as possible, get methane out of the get organic waste out of the landfill, all stuff that I think is pretty standard practice. The thing I did want to close with is that in addition to those emissions reductions actions, we have a series of administrative actions that we take really seriously. I just want to talk for 1 minute about those. So we implement our climate plan with an equity lens. We actually, for every project plan we do, for every time we request resources, we illustrate how this set of actions or these resources will be direct investment in our racial environmental equity work. We do typical things like monitoring and reporting. We have a regular update schedule. We do reporting to the CDP for larger transparency purposes, and we hold all of our new development consistent to be consistent with our CAP. We hold our development in our projects in our city accountable to be part of the implementation of our climate plan. But things we just recently added is one, direction to pursue grants opportunistically and strategically. Given the wide range of resources available, we are able to have council sort of delegate authority to submit grants, which used to be a council action, to staff so that we could be more nimble and sort of aggressive in how we pursued funding. And because we know one small city doing this work matters from a leadership perspective, but against the larger emissions profile of our state and country is a very small drop. And so understanding that our real value is in leadership and being able to engage in legislative and regulatory advocacy, but also taking leadership positions and supporting other communities in advancing their own work. And so we're able to receive direction in our climate plan to directly engage in those regulatory types of activities or advocacy types of activities. That's a pretty rapid race through things I think are interesting about our climate plan. And I'm looking forward to the other panelists' presentations and having any questions come our way at the end of that. So thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. Let's see, I believe our next speaker will be Aaron. I will pass over to Gabby to do a short intro.
All right. Can you guys see my slide?
Yep.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Chris. I will get right into our next speaker here, and then at the end we'll have some time for Q&A. Aaron Christensen Ishizaki, AIA AICP, is nationally recognized for advancing sustainable, healthy development. An urban planner and architect with over 20 years experience, she leads plans, strategies, and design research for public, private, and nonprofit and institutional clients with expertise in transit-oriented development, housing, and high-performance districts. Aaron's practice is inspired by connections to place and to each other in support of strong economies and resilient environments. As a partner at Mithun, an integrated design firm, Aaron brings creative thought leadership and a proven track record to directing complex projects. Her award-winning work and collaborative listening approach highlighting the nexus of well-being, resilience, and inclusion in projects that maximize investments for all. Her research drives practice, including the widely published Mariposa Healthy Living Initiative, and shapes industry standards like the Eco Districts Protocol and Enterprise Green Communities criteria. Aaron was recognized by the Urban Land Institute as a Global 40 Under 40 professional. And with that, I will kick it off to you, Aaron.
Great, thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm Erin. Great to be here with you all today, and look forward to sharing a little bit about our work that we were lucky to do with the Denver Housing Authority in the Sun Valley community. Can you see my screen okay, folks?
Yep, looks great.
Great. So just super quick for people who aren't familiar with Mithun, we're a design firm. We work across North America, and we're based in Seattle, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. And we really strongly believe that design is important to connect people to place and each other. We're an interdisciplinary collaborative, and we're on our 4th generation of leadership within the firm. So one big thing is we're really trying to constantly evolve in terms of our practice. And so we really embrace this collaborative model and multiple disciplines. So we apply the idea of integrated design to all of our different projects. And you're seeing here one of our studio spaces in Seattle and all the different folks that we love to engage in our work. Sustainable design, a few things to know about Mithun. So sustainable design is really a strong foundation for all of our work. We've been involved with some projects like the Lloyd Crossing Urban Design Study, looking at the ecological performance of an urban district, and are proud to have also worked on many projects that are built that are integrating a lot of these different metrics and recognition around sustainability. As a firm, we're really centering equity in all aspects of our practice. We are holding ourselves accountable through transparency. So we're in our 7th year of participating in the JUST label, which helps us track progress on key social equity metrics. We support the communities we work in. So we target 1 to 2% of our revenue for giving back. And that includes pro bono design services, volunteering, and other contributions. And then the third thing is we really believe in the power of research. And so we have a research program that helps us look at different aspects of evolving the practice and how we can help do that and sort of promote this culture of innovation throughout our work. So let's dive into Sun Valley. And I'll be sharing with you a bit about integrated health equity plans and how that relates, the kind of nexus between resilience, equity, and health. And so Sun Valley is a neighborhood in Denver, Colorado, and it want to kind of share with you some innovation and approaches around health action planning, and as a way to really overcome decades of disinvestment that's pretty common to many underserved historic American immigrant neighborhoods like Sun Valley. So this is a picture of the area. Planning was launched as a way to help shape and guide the implementation of equitable high performance redevelopment. And so this is a community, it's actually the lowest income community in the state. And you can see it's just really physically isolated, and the neighborhood is pretty fragmented around it with the highway and the river and large industrial areas. So that certainly does reflect a lot of the racially inequitable policies over the years, including red line and proximity to some of these stadium construction and other uses. And you can probably also notice from this that it has significantly more impervious surface than many of the other neighborhoods in Denver. So it's really susceptible to heat island, air quality, and flooding. And you can see these are the existing 333 units of public housing. We worked with the Denver Housing Authority on this project to look at a redevelopment framework for the neighborhood. It's also right adjacent to the South Platte River and is pretty low in the floodplain, so it does experience flooding as well. So there's multiple different programs, the main one being HUD's Choice Neighborhoods program, as well as social impact bonds within the city that are directing resources towards physical environment improvements and also human capital programs. And so in Sun Valley neighborhood, there are not many folks who live in the neighborhood, just a little less than 1,500. But tremendous, it's the most diverse zip code in the city and the county. And so a large number of children, a large number of immigrants, and over 80% of the residents live in poverty. And so the efforts are really, again, to begin to direct resources towards Sun Valley and to increase opportunities. So this is an image of the revitalization plan that Mithun prepared for the Denver Housing Authority, again, for that Choice Neighborhoods program. So it envisions a holistic community to support existing residents and also welcome new neighbors. So the goal is over 3,000 new homes, new jobs, so 300 new jobs, and really focusing on health, open space, and community spaces in place of what's there today. So it really does expand housing choices and looks at adding new district infrastructure. So wanted to just dive in onto this question of how this innovation of using health and health equity as a lens and foundation, and how that can help us deliver on the vision and help support communities. So in this case, we used what we called a healthy living action plan that was integrated within the planning process. And what that does is it centers on access to jobs, training, and benefits for community residents. Mithun and Denver Housing Authority worked for about 10 years to develop and evolve something what we call the Healthy Living Initiative. And so this is a place and people-based planning strategy that it drives decisions around real estate, programs for residences, and property management and operations decisions in a coordinated investment way to focus on community benefits. So we started this effort at another district in Denver called the Mariposa District, and really began to expand, you know, when we saw the progress and the community health outcomes. The Housing Authority began to look at it as a strategic effort that they can expand across all of their properties. So I think in terms of, you know, transferable lessons, it's something that could really be applicable for, you know, other agencies or large landowners or real estate entities that have a, you know, a large portfolio that they're working with, as well as organizations who, you know, are looking at specific areas and wanting to sort of focus on implementation. And we know in the previous slide here, we see a little diagram of the social determinants of health. So looking at all the different factors that address our health outcomes. And we know that it's not healthcare, of course, it's, you know, something like 70% of our health outcomes are really determined by our environment and our behavior. So in this case, we really wanted to integrate a very specific effort looking at working with a whole range of folks to try to focus in on health outcomes. In Sun Valley, the average life expectancy is almost 10 years less than in other neighborhoods, so it really was urgent to launch this effort. We worked together with a whole range of folks. So you can see in the top row, those are some of the folks. The very top is our resident liaisons and leaders who were hired by the Housing Authority to help be stewards of the effort. We have the folks from the Housing Authority across the real estate and the property management departments, as well as human services. We have folks who are patient navigators, public health folks, and community advocates, as well as technical folks from EPA and others. So it was really a tremendous effort. I want to say thank you mostly to the community who truly did lead the effort. So as part of the plan, we conducted a health needs assessment. We prioritized lived experience. So we used a whole range of different analyses, methods, got out, talked with residents, doing surveys and interviews, and watched how people were using the public space. A lot around social cohesion and understanding that the existing community does have a really strong sense of social connections, but that they didn't feel that their current community was really reflecting their culture. We also integrated looking at a range of different health factors together and mapping things like streetscape activation, crime data, and pedestrian environment together to see where the opportunities and priorities should be set. So the community prioritized these 4 topics as most important to take action on, and we call those our campaigns for action. So these were around safe and inclusive community, around creating a healthy and active place. Pause and Connect is about mental health and reducing stress, as well as resilience, and then opportunity for all. And so what this does is it bundles together evidence-based strategies into community projects and programs to help improve multiple different determinants. This is just kind of an overview diagram of what the Healthy Living Initiative process is for folks who are interested. Is that assessment, setting priorities, creating that action plan, and then really moving into implementing it and evaluating over time. So here are some highlights of how that in the physical plan, the healthy living elements play out. So really excited about this 11-acre riverfront park with different resilience and cultural elements. We have a maker district with a focus on job training and incubators, and a 3-acre urban farm and commercial kitchen, some examples. Part of the implementation tools that are a set of this include design guidelines and RFP criteria for projects. You can see an overview here. I won't get into detail, but this is all available. And so thinking about, for example, public and open space, providing specific evidence-based strategies that are also referencing different standards for folks to use as they sort of imagine and envision that riverfront park was really important. And again, because of all that paving and heat, asthma was affecting 1 in 5 adults and more than that of the children, of the child population. So we were really trying to think about some of those top climate risks and how we could address them through the open space projects and other elements, thinking about, you know, wildfires and smoke events as well. Here's an example of the building guidelines. We're excited. There are a lot of opportunities for job training that have been integrated within the plan. This is a fresh foods market that was built in place of a 7-Eleven, which was built in 2021. So very exciting. Sun Valley had been a food desert, and so it was really important to have this opportunity added early on into the community, and excited that it's there. It's run by a social enterprise that's sort of an offshoot of the Housing Authority, so it also functions as a job training with a focus around youth. And then transparency and commitment to evaluation. So the community's been disenfranchised for a very long time, and so transparency and accountability are like top importance. And so the Housing Authority is committed to regular reporting, and they do an annual survey of residents looking at short-term, intermediate, and long-term metrics. I'll do a little example of that. So the project is still under construction, making good progress. They're done with the first couple of phases. You can see one of the affordable apartment buildings here, and they're continuing on. This is just kind of a summary highlighting some of the different decisions that might be different with a healthy living process throughout the life cycle of the effort as compared to a regular planning process. So I'll leave that in there for a summary. And then I just wanted to say, so we also were able to go from the district scale health campaigns down to project design concepts. And so at Methuen, we were happy to serve as a health equity consultant, as well as sort of an owner's rep for the Housing Authority, collaborating with a local architect and design team on their phase 3 of the project, which is called Soul. And so this is a 130-unit building with live workspaces and right next to the elementary school and pretty close to that riverfront park. And so what we were able to do is look at this sort of design process where we have in yellow regular check-ins in terms of the Healthy Living Initiative and specific measures at each stage of the design process so that we're truly integrating it at that project scale. So we began to take those large-scale district campaigns down to design concepts to understand how those would flow through. And with the property manager folks and the resident services folks and the residents, really highlight what outcomes they wanted to prioritize here. So you can see kind of a working board on that. So we began to look for some of these different multi-benefit projects, things like providing some places of respite that are snuck into the corridors, or outdoor spaces as well that provide a place for folks to catch their breath and have a calming moment. So these are some of the storyboards we worked through with the design team and looking at different opportunities through physical design and to coordinate with programs within their project. What we ended up on this level, the project level, is developing a health action plan. You can see here there's a ton of detail looking at specific interventions and metrics and how they will be implemented. This is part of tracking along with the Enterprise Green Communities criteria. And so the project has been tracking with the eco-districts protocol as well as LEAD-ND, and then at the site-specific green communities criteria, just to understand kind of how alignment works there. So that's kind of an overview. We've been, they've continued to do surveys to understand some outcomes. It's still early days, first couple of phases in about 8 years since the effort was begun initially, but recent findings. So we're seeing that some of the residents have been seeing more stress. It's not that surprising if we think about the past few years, but there have been some great positive trends already with a 20% increase in physical activity, increase in checkups at the doctor, and improved metrics around employment, education, and social cohesion. So we're excited about that. So that's kind of an overview. Here's some more info if folks are interested, and there's my contact info. Look forward to discussing and also hearing from others from the last presenter. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Erin. Really great to see and hear some of those examples at the end of what's changes you've been seeing. It's nice to see. Let's see. I'll pass it off to Gabby to introduce our final speaker. But I want to remind you, if anyone has questions or comments for any of the speakers, you can put them in the Q&A tool, and we will be chatting about them after we hear from Matt.
Thanks. So how are we on time? Good?
All good, yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Well,
can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
All right, I will kick it off with an introduction for you, Matt, before we get into it. Matthew Burris is Deputy Chief Manager of Community and Economic Development for the City of Rancho Cucamonga. Some of his more notable achievements include shepherding the Etiwanda Heights Neighborhood and Conservation Plan to adoption, conceiving and leading the development of the Healthy Development Checklist, which is now in use by many Inland Empire communities, and serving as an inaugural Plan Commissioner for California's City of Drupa Valley. Matt has created and taught planning courses for both UC Berkeley and Riverside. He is co-chair for the UCLA Land Use Law and Policy Conference and an active lecturer for the American Planning Association events. He is a certified planner, lead accredited professional, and holds a Bachelor's of Science in Environmental Studies from UC Santa Barbara, as well as a Master of Science in City and Regional Planning and a Master of Science in Engineering from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. Outside of work, Matt and his wife are raising their 2 boys on their hobby farm in Drupa Valley, California. With that, I will kick it off to you, Matt.
thanks, Gabby. Can you guys see my slides?
Yep, they look good.
Great. Thank you so much for letting me join you guys today. I'm really happy to spend a few minutes talking about the general plan update that we completed about 2 years ago here in Rancho Cucamonga. Couple things just to kind of follow Chris's lead. We're going to try and, or I guess all by myself today, the big idea here to share with you some innovation that we think we delivered through this general plan. In particular, we think this plan is a really good example of how function follows form. We went into this with some real lofty ambitions about community outcomes, especially with regard to climate and health and equity. And we think this general plan is a really good example of how you do that through physical changes in the environment. Really think this is also a good example of a bridge document, at least in California, between the last generation of general plans and the next generation of general plans. California, like so many other states, has some pretty severe housing shortages. And as a result, I think, of a lot of new state legislation that is minimizing the regulatory power of zoning and pushing more emphasis on general plans. We're rapidly moving into a position where we need much more implementation focused general plans, and we've got a lot of good examples in this plan. So I hope to hit those points for you guys today and show you a little how we used outreach to adapt to changing circumstances to keep the project on track, and how we kind of put that form follows function, or excuse me, function follows form into action. So with regard to Rancho Cucamonga's general plan, we started to update this plan in 2020 for a variety of reasons. One of the most was that in the previous 10 years, California had implemented a lot of new legislation that affected general plans, and we really wanted to make sure that our general plan was up to date. Our climate action plan was coming up to its term and really needed to be updated. The economy was different. We saw evolving housing needs. There was new legislation and thinking on wildfire, and we are up against the San Gabriel Mountains in a high fire hazard severity area. But one of the most important drivers for updating the general plan came out of a 2008 effort to address health in Rancho Cucamonga. We got engaged in some of the healthy communities movements starting in 2008 when we saw that there were some pretty notable health disparities in some areas of our community. And as we began to dig into that problem, we learned about the connections between the built environment and health outcomes. And we had started to put those types of things in place. We were really trying to move towards a more walkable urban form. But after 5 years of really having some concerted efforts to deliver walkable urban places, specifically to address some of those health outcomes, we learned that we really needed to update our tools. And so with those things in mind, we embarked on a comprehensive general plan update, and we signed our contract with our consultant. I think it was in January of 2020, and we were all slated to start public outreach in the third week of March 2020. I don't know about what you all were doing, but the third week of March 2020, we were not doing public outreach for a 20-year comprehensive plan update. So we had to scramble very quickly to revamp our entire outreach approach and strategy. With an eye on a tight deadline set by state law with regard to housing element, the housing component of our general plan, we had to have this thing done about the end of December, about the end of 2021. I think we had until February 2022 to get everything buttoned up and complete. Otherwise, we were going to lose a lot of our regulatory authority. So we jumped in and made a hard pivot as quickly as we could to figuring out how to do 100% virtual, online based outreach and engagement. We had some good experiences in a few years prior to working with the community on a large neighborhood planning effort and had started to cut our teeth, if you will, on new virtual tools, but we had to make a hard pivot. And we fully embraced it and ended up having really, really good turnout. With over, we had millions of points of input from the community. One of the great things that helped us to have such robust community engagement, we have a policy here in Rancho, our equitable engagement policy, that we wrote as a way to reflect our approaches, positions, and values around community engagement. And similar to what Chris described with regard to San Luis Obispo, at each step of our outreach process, we take a look at who's participating. And if we see that any component of our community is underrepresented, we will pivot our efforts and change our tools, strategies, etc., to go talk to those community members, bring them into the process. We'll go to their neighborhoods, their churches, their social gatherings, their markets, and go talk to them about our planning efforts. And we really wholly embraced that. We found that at the end of the day, the input we received from the community was really outstanding, giving us extremely clear direction on their expectations for us. And perhaps it was because of the lens of the COVID shutdown that was we were all experiencing when starting this process. But we did continue to hear from our community that they still had strong expectations for health, strong expectations for equity, and very strong expectations for stewardship. And it was really interesting for us that at the end of the day, our community felt very strongly that Rancho was a great place, but they wanted to see it continue to evolve. And this idea of more vibrant, engaging places within the community really gave us great direction to write the general plan. So in addition to this clear vision and values that they left us with, there were 5 big ideas that we took into planning the next generation of the city: to create destinations, design for people first, provide connectivity and accessibility, establish Rancho as the cultural and economic hub of the Inland Empire, and address environmental justice. So they give us really clear direction that while they like their community and they love their neighborhoods, they really wanted to see some change in the core areas of the community. And so we mapped those out with the community, figuring out how we could put the plan into action. And we embarked on a strategy where we could largely protect the neighborhoods in place and then look to focus new development, new housing, new centers of activity along our major corridors and in a couple of our major centers. And the idea where that the established neighborhoods would be protected, but we could still provide new housing and new opportunities for people to stay in the community without changing a lot of the neighborhoods that were so valued, really resonated with our community. One of the
Hey, Matt, sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to say, I think maybe we're still seeing the first slide and folks can move through the slides on their own, but
Oh
just wanted
gosh,
I just realized that we are off of you. So I think you're on slide 6, is that right? Or 5,
should
maybe
be.
7 now.
Okay, how about, can you see one? It says neighborhoods, corridor centers.
Um,
I'm
maybe
seeing
it
that.
sounds like it's moving for everyone else and maybe not for me. So apologies for any,
No problem.
interruption there on my end.
No sweat. Maybe if we have more delays in the slides, folks could just raise their hand and I'll slow down. Maybe things need to catch up, but I'll keep going unless I see hands raised or any other interruptions. Okay.
Great, sounds good.
We put a huge emphasis on a general plan that described the types of places that people wanted. And this is where the focus on an implementation focus plan really started with the plan designations, where we broke the city up into different place types, talking with people about the types of places they think they live in and the types of places they want to live in. And we found this to be an immensely helpful tool. Now, while it took our policymakers and some of our community members a little while to get up to speed, being able to describe the community in terms of some really clear types of places where we had rural areas in the community, some semi-rural neighborhoods, kind of some sprawling ranches in the front country up against the mountains, as well as we have suburban neighborhoods that have disconnected street patterns, kind of very limited mix of uses, as well as some traditional neighborhoods and urban neighborhoods where we have higher density, much greater focus on walkability and small block networks. It really helped change the conversation we could have with the community, and it really helped us to clarify a new land use plan that focused on areas that were going to be rural, areas that were going to be suburban, and areas that were going to be traditional or urban. And adjust, excuse me, I can say that word, adjust and calibrate a lot of our infrastructure and open space strategies specifically to meet those ideas, or kind of those different expectations for the types of places that people might live in the future. Additionally, knowing that we really wanted to jumpstart the implementation effort, we went into greater detail for certain areas in the community where perhaps folks shared with us they really had specific expectations, or we knew there were really critical opportunity areas. And so the general plan lays out far more detail than in past general plans, what those expectations might be. In some cases, mapping out new street networks on the local scale, more specificity for parks and street networks, or more specificity on specific community development or economic development strategies that were going to be necessary in order to make these places become a reality. We also found that going into that additional level of details, you can see in some of these slides here, where we brought in extra models, watercolors, drawings, sketches, help people to more fully realize what the vision might be and make for much clearer conversations about expectations and hopes for the future. While it was a little scary putting ourselves out there and saying, this is exactly the thing we want to try and accomplish here, it really made for a far more robust conversation and really made the adoption process and subsequent implementation much, much easier. And so layered throughout the general plan, we have these place-based strategies that put a greater emphasis on how we're going to achieve outcomes and change in the focus areas as well as across the entire community. And this kind of network, if you will, of ideas that we layered through the plan has been really helpful as we've had to shift and adapt to new ideas that have popped up that we really never anticipated when we were writing the general plan just a few years ago. But hearing from the community that they really wanted to see change. They weren't especially patient in waiting for things, especially given the housing crunch that we all continue to face. The general plan put a very strong emphasis on implementation and a work plan and kind of making things happen. So we laid out a very specific work plan for the things that each of our departments needed to do, different efforts that needed to be initiated, many of which we were able to start, like a code update, local hazard mitigation plan, et cetera, before the general plan was even adopted, mapping out how we were going to get there. Similarly, we mapped that all out for and provided some specific detailed examples, kind of a how-to guide in the implementation section of the general plan, so that both our planners and the development community on the other side of the counter, if you will, could see exactly how we could get to these types of places throughout the city, how we can activate the public realm, what we do with public spaces, especially our automobile-focused streets, and how we can otherwise knit the fabric together. So the last chapter of the general plan is full of these how-to examples to help both, again, facilitate community conversations, help support our policymakers as they're reviewing proposals, but maybe even more importantly, trying to lay out as much in the way of expectations for the development community. So when a new developer is coming to town, they know exactly what they might be getting into, and they can make the best business case as possible before they pull the trigger, if you will, on purchasing land or engaging in some kind of escrow and embarking on the entitlement process. You can see here the general plan is chock full of examples of kind of the how-to, as well as the what we hope to see. One of the other components that is layered into the implementation section is our environmental justice strategy. One of the new laws that California passed, I think it was in 2012, requires an environmental justice element in all new general plans. And in Rancho, while we're a 180,000 person, 50 square mile suburb outside of Los Angeles. And at a first glance, you may not think that environmental justice or climate action is anything that is especially important to us, but they really are deep values for our community. And as such, we elected to not write an environmental justice element, but instead take the ideas of health and equity and access and weave them through the entire general plan, so that every piece of the general plan, every piece of the land use strategy, every piece of the transportation and open space components were all driving us towards a more equitable future. But that is mapped out and explained in more detail in the in the implementation section. We are a low property tax city. We only get 4 or 5 cents on the dollar. It makes it very interesting, and we have to be very fiscally prudent. So we took a really close look at how the general plan was going to perform fiscally. But we also took a more innovative approach with the help of Urban 3 to take a look at value per acre. While we've got really great land values, all things considered, as a mostly suburban city, who for the last 40 years never really had to worry about building out, we had to take a much different look at how the general plan was going to deliver on overall assessed value. And so one of the things that really helped our policymakers in supporting the general plan was this fiscal approach, this really fiscally sound, fiscally resilient strategy. In this diagram here showing how through the general plan, through mixed use, through increased density, through a more urban approach in key areas of the city and corridors, we were unlocking another, I think, $5 billion in assessed value by focusing on value per acre and focusing on active, engaging centers throughout the city. As I said, we were very, very implementation focused in the general plan. We mapped that out as well, both in writing the general plan and explaining to our community how the pieces were going to come together. One of the things that we were very sensitive to, we did not want to write a general plan that was going to sit on the shelf. We really wanted a general plan that was going to help make change. We didn't want to talk to the community, hear from them what they aspire to, make promises to deliver it, and then just see business as usual continue. And the climate action plan really was a big part of that as well. We had prepared a climate action plan in, I think it was 2014, 2015 with a 5-year horizon. It was our initial climate action plan, kind of scratching the surface, trying to get things going. And it was met with mostly support, but it was also met with a good bit of challenge by some members of the community who really felt like climate action threatened their way of life. This time around, the climate action plan rested really heavily on the general plan. And in talking about the community's values, starting with their values, their vision, their expectations, and hope for the future, using the general plan to map out that future, explain how we were going to get there, and then using the climate action plan to show them what we were going to track, how the different components of the general plan update were going to address climate action, address climate resiliency, and then track those efforts, really made for a completely different paradigm of support with the community. And then just wrapping it up real quick, we did start a development code update. We had hoped to have those things in parallel, where we could have the general plan, climate action plan, and other subsequent documents and the development code all get adopted at one time. It ended up going in some slight stages with the development code following shortly after. But at the end of the day, we were really excited at the progress we made. I'm the type that believes that the proof is really all success is what happens after the general plan is done. It's really not that we write a great plan, it's what kind of changes can we see. And in the first year after the general plan was adopted, we entitled 1,400 new units, almost all of them in these urban mixed-use transit supported corridors or centers. We issued building permits for another 1,200 units in those types of places as well. And while the climate action plan and general plan map out a future that we're projecting 20% reduction in VMT, about a 20% reduction in 2018 GHG levels by 2030, and accomplishes a path forward to 20,000 new units. We think that seeing that kind of development potential suddenly unlock demonstrates that a implementation-oriented plan that helps shift a suburban community towards some healthy, equitable, sustainable development patterns is achievable. So that was a whole lot. I know I talk really fast. I really hope that's helpful, and I'm really happy to answer any questions anybody might have.
Okay, thank you so much, Matt. And thanks to Aaron and Chris as well. I've got a couple questions I'd like to ask. I think, well, Gabby and I have a couple questions together, but if others have questions you'd like to ask, you can use the Q&A bubble section of Teams to submit it. But I guess one question I'm always interested to ask, and this is for all three of you, is sort of like, what was there anything that surprised you in this process, either like things you and I think some of you might have mentioned some things here and there, but like something that you heard from people, a priority or some sort of strategy that you ended up with at the end that you maybe weren't expecting to come out of it. Anything to share for that?
Yeah, I've got one that we
Yeah, go ahead.
continue to circle back to. It isn't particularly focused on maybe sustainability, but one of the things that our community really grabbed a hold of um, in looking at comparables, the Inland Empire is the same size as South Carolina, both in terms of population and geography. And our community that really resonated with them. Thought, okay, well, hold on a second. You know, we're the size of a state, and yet there's no capital. If I've got a, I deleted this out. I've got a slide I could dig up if you guys want to see. But if you look at development patterns and value per acre for the entire Inland Empire, there's no clear center. And our community said, well, why can't we be the center of the Inland Empire? Why can't we be the cultural and economic hub? Why can't we be the cultural and economic capital of the Inland Empire? And that idea really drove some big thinking amongst the community. I mean, all of a sudden, our community was talking about things like, well, how come we don't have an LA Live? Why don't we have 10 and 15-story buildings? And funnily enough, that started to really set some great foundation where a couple months after we were finishing that first phase of the general plan update, Brightline West, which is a private rail carrier, showed up and said, "Hey, we'd really like to connect to Rancho Cucamonga and have it be the southern terminus of high-speed rail between California and Nevada." And we had already had the conversation with the community, and so the community was like, "Well, yeah, of course we would do that. Of course it fits." That really blew my mind.
Thanks. That's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
I can jump in with
yeah,
two
go ahead.
really important findings that we had. By the way, that Metrolink line station rendering was amazing, Matt. I can't wait to visit that place and whenever that gets built in 20 years or something. It's really great.
Chris,
So
they're
our two,
supposed to break ground next year. I hope you're here.
I'll be there.
I'll buy you a beer,
Give me
man.
the gold shovel and the gold hard hat. I'll be there. Um, so yeah, I think that the two things for us, one is around process, and this isn't a particularly profound finding. Like if if you're tuned into any of these conversations, it's like, yeah, duh. But it's worth sharing that when we reached out to 1,000 community members, but those 1,000 community members tended to be folks that have owned property in the city for a long time, tend to be part of an environmental advocacy organization. We got very different got similar support for the broad level climate policy and direction that we're taking, but very different direction on the specifics of implementation than we did when we were talking to other folks in our community. So when we convened our expert roundtables, which included paid participation to community members that included folks that lived in affordable housing, folks that managed multiple rental units, folks that depended on active transportation and transit for their mobility, and included public health professionals. We got some really incredible ideas. And one example is we were like, if we only gave people $1,000, then they would definitely do a $10,000 energy efficiency retrofit on their home. Like this is common thinking, right? And we talked to a healthcare professional, and they're like, that's insane. Like that's never going to work. And we know in our industry that one more benefit that's at the wrong scale is not how we get people to have better public health outcomes. The way we do that is through case advisors and case managers that help people navigate spaces. And so we really shifted resources from like, let's just put money out there to let's create a resource that helps people navigate through multiple challenging spaces that have effective outcomes. The other really key finding that's been happening through implementation is just how disruptive a changing climate is to our ability to achieve our climate plan and our larger economic development and housing goals. We had a 25-year flood in January that really disrupted, is costing us so much money and time and attention, is slowing our pace of climate implementation. And we just think about the rate and scale of disruptions of climate hazards that are coming down the line. It's just so critical to begin taking that seriously and making sure that financially, programmatically, policy, all those things are oriented towards mitigating those risks so we can have financial stability that's necessary to create the communities that we want to live in and achieve the climate goals that we're working towards.
Those are great. One thing that strikes me is a comment we heard like extremely early on in the redevelopment planning process in Denver. We were looking at the idea of rebuilding public housing and to this mixed income model. And there was a comment from one of the residents that said, like, that's nice, like new housing would be fine, but it doesn't really affect my quality of life or my path to success at all. And as an affordable housing developer or a designer, it's like shocking to hear what, like a entirely new home wouldn't do that, and it really changed our entire outlook on what is our job and what are we here to do. Really think about, this idea of focusing on people and their well-being. Like that's the objective. It's not a housing development project, it's how can we help to support communities. And so that just fundamentally changed our outlook, our focus on like, let's integrate between departments, between sectors, like, let's figure this out. So for me, that was a watershed moment, I would say.
Great. Well, thanks to all three of you. Those are all interesting, I think, kind of lessons learned or insights into your process. Let's see, Gabby, do you have a question you'd like to ask?
Sure. I was intrigued. This question is mostly for Chris, but to anyone who might want to speak to it. You had mentioned that there was some California state funding that had kind of led to the development of the project. I'm curious, just like if you could speak to those programs a little bit and how you interacted with them. I think it's just kind of, an interesting larger conversation at a national scale. I know it's specific to you there in California, but I think within the Sustainable Communities Division, we've wondered like how do more of these plans get created? And it seems like that was a integral reason that it got started over there. So if you could just speak a little more to that, and if anyone else has any thoughts on funding programs as well, or how you got the funding for it, I'd be curious to hear about that.
Yeah, thanks. So I think that initially the support for the climate work was really born out of the community and their electoral preferences, and then subsequently the elected council leadership that directed us to do the work. I think as we were updating our plan last year, though, and the Inflation Reduction Act had already been passed, and the IIJA, whatever, I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head, had been passed as well, and there were billions and billions of dollars coming towards cities and states. It was a really great opportunity for us to say, okay, the general outcomes we wanted to provide in our community, the community benefits we want to provide through our work are the same, but now there are funding pathways to achieve those, but many of those require administrative investments. Many of those require, like, for example, cities for the first time can take direct tax benefit pay for investments in clean infrastructure. So that means, okay, maybe perhaps our projects are now 30% cheaper, but now we need to have someone who has tax expertise in our finance department. So really understanding like the through lines of how this historic funding implements our work, and how through our climate plan we're really focused less on like, what is this action, who will do this action. It's more like, okay, this action is something you've already committed to, there's now a funding stream for it. What is the sort of administrative investments we need to make to unlock that funding to ensure it flows into our community and our community can achieve that benefit? And so it really like takes us out of like a community planning space, sort of already answered the question of what the benefit is, and takes us into like an administrative functional space of how we unlock that for our community.
I can add, we I think received some funding from the state that's probably a similar funding stream that San Luis Obispo did. One of the things that I wish I could, I knew who did this and I could shake their hand, but many years ago, Ranch Cucamonga put in place a very small development fee add-on to fund comprehensive planning. And we anticipate a general plan update cycle of about 10 years. So every time we have an application pulled for entitlement or building, whatnot, there's a little bit of money that gets pulled aside and goes into a pot to help pay for the general plan update. And I cannot tell you how grateful I am to have had adequate resources to do a general plan update, especially when we were up against tight deadlines from the state and suddenly facing a global pandemic and trying to figure out how to do an update. I mean, the resources were really grateful, and I would implore all communities to try and get a similar funding stream in place.
It's really fantastic to see the integration of health equity in the climate planning into both of your work. So thank you so much for sharing it. For folks who are interested in trying to get some resources to support health action planning, I would definitely suggest, like, there are certainly grants out there, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and others who are very supportive of those kind of efforts, especially when it's at that community large scale and can be kind of a systems change type project. I will also mention for efforts that involve affordable housing, Enterprise Community Partners is a great organization that has technical assistance available for developers and specifically around integrating the health action planning work. So there's a lot of great options out there.
Thanks for that addition, Erin. I just want to say, in the spirit of providing resources and taking this out of the abstract, many of the cities here are also likely have staff that are members of the Urban Sustainability Directors Network or have staff that participate in the National League of Cities conversations. And both of those spaces have invested heavily in providing resources for local governments to capitalize on federal and time-limited state resources. And so I would encourage folks to pursue those channels as well.
Great, thank you. I don't see any comments from attendees, but if anyone's in attendance and wants to ask a question, I think we can bring you off mute if you want. So if you want to ask like a question out loud, feel free to raise your hand on Teams and we can take you off. We'll checking the Q&A. Otherwise, let's see. Gabby, did you have any other questions for our speakers?
I've got a couple. I'll just kind of throw a couple like things I'm curious about out there and turn it over to you guys. Matt, what you said about minimizing the power of zoning really struck me. It stood out as something that I'd like to hear you speak to a little bit more. I was curious about the implementation, via the general plan and the developer's perceptions to that, and the actual functionality of that. Just an interesting phrase. So I was very curious. And then I don't mean to just have, California related questions. I apologize, Erin, but I'm curious again about the, Chris, you had mentioned something about CEQA, and that's obviously California specific, but I'm curious about what exactly you were able to do in order to plan for, compliance with that act in the long run.
Gabby, I'll give you happy to jump in and address that. So California's not alone in experiencing housing crisis. I think we're just maybe 40 or 50 years ahead of most of the other states in the union. And for a very long time, California as a government has been pushing, requiring, and incentivizing local governments to deliver more housing. We 100% have a supply problem in California, as well as I'm guessing most other states. As a result of that, the California legislature has been passing numerous laws to help reduce local barriers to delivering more housing. And our general plan, our development code, our philosophy is very much aligned with that. We do not want to be in the way. We are not a no growth or a slow growth city. We are really a pro development city. We will take it all. We'll take it all. Let's deliver a fantastic future for as many people as possible. However, I think there's, as with so many things, there are oftentimes unintended consequences. And one of the things that we have seen both here in our city as well as with colleagues throughout the state is that some of the new housing laws that are intended to reduce the barriers to delivering new housing are also reducing cities' ability to regulate housing. So, as an example, if a let's say a project applicant comes in, they say, you know, we want to make 5% of our units affordable. They can invoke the benefits, if you will, of affordable housing law. They don't have, excuse me, density bonus law, not affordable housing law, density bonus law. And they don't have to provide more units. They don't have to request a density bonus, but they can start asking for waivers and concessions that allow them to point to different development standards and say, you know, that inhibits our ability to deliver housing, and we don't want to abide by that. So one of the things that really concerns me about a plan like ours, where we're trying to deliver change through the changes in the built environment, you know, a more urban future is a more efficient future. It's a healthier future. But we've had conversations with developers where they've said, well, we don't want to do a small block network. We don't want to do the frontage improvements. We don't want to do the transit-oriented development. We don't want to do the mix of uses. You know, we still want to do surface parking because that's what we wrote into our pro forma. So, you know, I don't know that we're there yet, but at least it feels like the trend is that if it comes down to delivering more housing, cities will not be able to ask for much of anything else. And one of the fallbacks, if you will, in the way this newer body of legislation is written is that the general plan leads. So we went through a whole process of establishing objective development standards over the last couple of years, but at the end of the day, the objective development standards can still be discarded, and in situations where that happens, the general plan leads. So if it's written in the general plan and it's written in a very specific way, then the city has a much stronger position to hold the line on expectations, where we can say, well, the general plan says that you must have blocks that range from, you know, 14 to 1,800 feet in perimeter. And if it isn't in that, you know, range, then too bad. We do not have to let that go. So I'm expecting that over the next 5 or 10 years, at least in California, as legislation proceeds down that path, we will have to write our general plans with far more specificity. So those things that are critical to the city's success, those things that are critical to our specific outcomes are protected.
That's a really rich answer, and I think I would be interested in a hour-long webinar on that topic. So I look forward to that posting. Just the nexus of housing and climate is also really real as we think about, especially in the city of San Luis Obispo, our primary development is infill, and so our opportunity to exact large amounts of transportation development impact fees to make the infrastructure changes we want is going to be much more fragmented, just at a time when we're getting rid of parking and need more shared infrastructure and mobility options. So definitely a space to be paying attention to. And that's related to your question around complying with California Environmental Quality Act. We adopted a local threshold of significance. So if you have a project that's subject to CEQA, you need to have a per capita greenhouse gas emissions level that's much lower than it was previously. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but it's quite low. And effectively, that means, you know, you need to have zero emissions buildings from your energy systems. You need to be providing shared mobility. You need to, if you're on a transit corridor, if you are in the urban core, it's much easier. If you're at the perimeter and you have lots of trip generation, it's much harder. But so far, we're seeing folks comply with it really well. There's sort of guidance around folks that can't achieve those thresholds or comply to those thresholds on site, purchasing offset credits or credits that allow them to do that. And that's a really interesting conversation, maybe in depth at another time, but the value of those credits, the benefit of those credits, if those are happening in some methane capture plant or somewhere around the world with no ability to track their value relative to they're happening in our backyard, are really, really important questions. And in support of that, we've invested a lot of time with our local air districts and regional partners to develop sort of an emerging carbon credit bank that allows folks to offset their emissions by directly investing in emissions reductions in our community. Not launched yet, and the devil's in the details, and there are a lot of details to be ironed out, but something we're really interested in developing in the near term. We have a new friend.
Yeah. Well, I guess, Aaron, anything to add on the current topic before we wrap up? All right.
No,
Great.
I just would say, like, it is so cool to see the working across these different implementation topics of like finance, administration, and like really ironing these things out. And I think it sounds like we have 2 or 3 topics for future webinars, so that's great.
Yeah, we'll be staying busy, won't we? Yeah, thank you to all the speakers for being here and giving such great presentations. Like we said, we'll get the recording up on our website. Folks can look at it for credit after the fact as well on a different number, but we'll also post the slides if you all are okay with that, so that folks can take a look at them. Otherwise, thank you again so much, and I think we'll go ahead and wrap up. So have a good rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you.
Happy Halloween, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.